The day was cold, unusually so for early October. The sky above Maplewood hung low, a thick blanket of gray clouds that seemed to press down on the small town like an invisible weight. People moved slowly along the narrow path leading to the cemetery, their footsteps crunching against gravel softened by recent rain. Among them walked Ethan Carter, a lanky teenager whose dark hair stuck out unevenly from beneath his beanie. His hands were shoved deep into the pockets of his oversized jacket, but they weren't enough to shield him from the chill or the emptiness gnawing at his chest. Ethan kept his gaze fixed on the ground as he followed his father, Daniel, who walked stiffly ahead of him. Daniel's shoulders were squared, his jaw clenched tight as though holding himself together required every ounce of strength he had left. They didn't speak. Neither of them had said much since the news came. Laura, Ethan's mother, was gone. Just like that. No warnings, no long goodbyes, just a sudden illness that swept through her body faster than anyone could comprehend. Now she lay in a coffin waiting to be lowered into the earth, leaving behind a silence too vast to fill. They approached the gravesite. Ethan felt a strange detachment settle over him. It wasn't real. None of this could be real. His mom couldn't be dead. She was supposed to be at home right now, humming while she cooked dinner or sitting cross-legged on the couch reading one of her favorite books. But instead, here they were standing in front of a polished wooden box adorned with white roses. The crowd gathered around the grave was small but heartfelt. Neighbors, friends, and distant relatives exchanged quiet words of condolence. Some offered hugs or pats on the back, but Ethan barely registered any of it. He nodded absent-mindedly when people spoke to him, murmuring polite thank yous without really hearing what they said. All he wanted was for this day to end, for everything to go back to normal. But deep down he knew normal wasn't coming back. When it came time for final goodbyes, Ethan hesitated. Everyone else had already stepped forward to pay their respects, placing flowers or mementos onto the casket before stepping aside. Now it was his turn. Daniel gave him a gentle nudge, urging him forward. Taking a shaky breath, Ethan stepped up to the edge of the coffin. Laura looked peaceful, almost serene, lying there among the flowers. Her pale face was framed by strands of honey-blonde hair that someone had carefully arranged around her shoulders. She wore the blue dress she loved, the one she always saved for special occasions. If it weren't for the stillness, the unnatural stillness, she might have looked like she was simply sleeping. Ethan swallowed hard, trying to hold back the lump rising in his throat. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a single red rose. Holding it tightly, he placed it gently on her chest, letting his fingers linger for just a moment longer than necessary. Then, leaning closer, he whispered, "Goodbye, Mom." His voice cracked on the last word, betraying the tears threatening to spill over. But as he straightened up, something caught his eye. Something inside the coffin. At first he thought it was just a trick of the light, a reflection bouncing off the polished wood or maybe even his own imagination playing tricks on him. But no, it was real. Beneath Laura's folded hands, nestled almost imperceptibly against the satin lining, lay a small metallic object. It gleamed faintly despite the dullness of the day, its surface etched with intricate patterns that seemed to shift and shimmer as Ethan stared at it. His heart skipped a beat. What was that? Why hadn't anyone mentioned it before? This thing wasn't part of the funeral arrangements. It shouldn't be there. Panic bubbled up inside him, making his palms sweat and his breathing quicken. He leaned in closer, squinting to get a better look, but before he could make sense of it, a firm hand gripped his shoulder. "Ethan," came a low voice behind him. Startled, Ethan turned to see Mr. Harper, the family lawyer, standing there, with a concerned expression. Harper was an older man with thinning gray hair and glasses perched on the bridge of his nose. Normally calm and composed, today there was a tension in his posture that Ethan hadn't noticed before. "Let's give your mother some peace," Harper said softly, his tone carrying an urgency that didn't quite match his words. He gave Ethan's shoulder another squeeze, steering him gently away from the coffin. Reluctantly, Ethan obeyed, allowing himself to be guided back to where Daniel stood waiting. but his mind raced, replaying the image of that strange object over and over again. Who had put it there? And why? The rest of the service passed in a blur. Words were spoken, prayers were said, but Ethan barely heard any of it. His thoughts were consumed by the mystery of the metallic device. As the mourners began to disperse, heading toward their cars or lingering to offer more condolences, Ethan found himself hanging back. He watched as the pallbearers prepared to lower the coffin into the ground, his stomach twisting into knots. That thing, it was going down there with her. Whatever it was, wherever it had come from, it was about to disappear forever beneath layers of dirt and stone. Daniel eventually noticed his son's hesitation and came over to stand beside him. Placing a reassuring hand on Ethan's shoulder, he said, "It's time to let her go, buddy." His voice was rough with emotion, but there was kindness in it too. Still, Ethan couldn't bring himself to move. Instead, he nodded mutely, forcing himself to take one last look at the coffin before turning away. The drive home was silent except for the rhythmic swish of windshield wipers clearing away the drizzle that had started falling again. Ethan stared out the window, watching as the familiar streets of Maplewood rolled by. Everything looked the same, yet nothing felt right. The world outside seemed distant, unreal, like he was viewing it through a foggy pane of glass. Back at the house, Ethan retreated to his room, closing the door firmly behind him. Sitting on the edge of his bed, he buried his face in his hands, trying to steady his racing thoughts. That object, it was all he could think about. Its presence nagged at him, refusing to let him rest. Who would place something like that in a coffin? Was it some kind of mistake? Or was it intentional? And most importantly, what did it mean? As the hours ticked by, Ethan realized he wouldn't find answers sitting alone in his room. Whatever that thing was, it had been meant for his mother. And somehow he needed to figure out why. That night, sleep eluded Ethan completely. Every time he closed his eyes, the image of the strange metallic object came rushing back to him, clearer than ever. It wasn't just its appearance that haunted him. It was the way it seemed to pulse, with life, almost as if it were watching him too. He tossed and turned in bed, replaying the scene from earlier in his mind. Who had placed it there? Why hadn't anyone noticed it before? And why did it feel so wrong? By morning, Ethan knew. He couldn't ignore it anymore. Whatever that thing was, it didn't belong in his mother's coffin. Something about it felt important, too important to leave buried alongside her. If he wanted answers, he would have to find them himself. The idea of sneaking into the morgue terrified him, but desperation pushed him forward. After waiting until late evening when the house grew quiet, Ethan grabbed a flashlight and slipped out through the back door. The streets of Maplewood were deserted at this hour, their usual charm replaced by an unsettling stillness under the weak glow of streetlights. Each step toward the funeral home felt heavier than the last, as though the weight of what he was about to do pressed down on him more with every passing second. When he arrived, the building loomed ahead of him like a shadowy monolith. Its windows were dark, save for a faint light spilling from one corner upstairs. Ethan hesitated outside, his heart pounding wildly against his ribs. What if someone caught him? What if he found something he wasn't ready to face? But then he thought of his mother, the woman who had always been his anchor, and steeled himself. He owed it to her to uncover the truth. He circled around to the side entrance, finding it unlocked after some careful jiggling of the handle. The air inside hit him immediately, cold, sterile, and tinged with the faint smell of chemicals. His footsteps echoed softly against the tiled floor as he made his way deeper into the building. The silence was deafening, broken only by the occasional hum of a refrigerator or the distant ticking of a clock. Ethan followed the signs pointing toward the morgue, his palms slick with sweat despite the chill in the air. When he finally reached the room where the coffins were stored, he paused, taking a moment to steady his breathing. Pushing open the heavy double doors, he stepped inside. Rows of metal drawers lined the walls, each labeled with numbers and names. Ethan scanned them quickly, searching for the one belonging to his mother. When he found it, he hesitated again, his hand hovering above the handle. This was it, the moment of no return. Summoning all his courage, he pulled the drawer open. There she was. Laura lay exactly as he remembered her, peaceful and still, surrounded by the same satin lining that had cradled her during the funeral. For a brief second, Ethan allowed himself to simply look at her, committing every detail to memory. Then, forcing himself to focus, he turned his attention to the space beneath her folded hands, but the metallic object was gone. Ethan froze, his stomach dropping like a stone. How could it be missing? Had someone taken it already? Or had he imagined the whole thing? Panic surged through him, making his head spin. He leaned closer, inspecting the area thoroughly, but there was nothing, not even a trace of where the device might have been. Before he could process what this meant, a noise startled him, a sharp click followed by the sound of footsteps echoing down the hallway outside. Ethan's blood ran cold. Someone was coming. Heart racing, he ducked behind a nearby gurney, crouching low to avoid being seen. Moments later, 2 men entered the room. They wore black suits and carried themselves with an air of authority that set Ethan on edge. One of them held a small handheld device that emitted a low hum, scanning the area methodically. Their voices were hushed but urgent, their words sending chills down Ethan's spine. "Phase 2 is underway," one of them said, glancing at the scanner in his hand. "We need to locate the anchor before activation begins." "The signal is weak here," the other replied, his tone clipped. It must have been moved recently. Ethan's mind raced as he listened, piecing together fragments of their conversation. Anchor, signal. None of it made sense, but one thing was clear. They were looking for the same object he'd seen in the coffin. And whatever it was far more significant than he'd realized. The men continued their search, moving systematically through the room. Ethan held his breath, praying they wouldn't notice him hiding in the shadows. His muscles ached from staying perfectly still, but he dared not move. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they left, their footsteps fading into the distance. Once he was sure they were gone, Ethan scrambled to his feet, his legs trembling beneath him. He needed help, someone who could make sense of what was happening. But who could he trust? Who would even believe him? As he hurried out of the morgue and back onto the empty streets, Ethan's thoughts turned to Claire Dawson. She had introduced herself at the funeral, claiming to work for a private research firm interested in unusual phenomena. At the time, Ethan had dismissed her as just another stranger offering condolences, but now he wondered if she might know something about the object, or the men in suits. Back at home, Ethan sat at his desk, staring blankly at the wall while his mind churned. He didn't know how to reach Claire, but he decided to try anyway. Scrolling through his phone, he found her number scribbled hastily on a piece of paper tucked inside his wallet. Taking a deep breath, he dialed it. To his relief, she answered almost immediately. Her voice was calm but curious. "Ethan, is everything okay?" "I need your help," he blurted out, his words tumbling over each other in his haste. "I saw something at my mom's funeral, something weird, and now I think people are looking for it." There was a pause on the other end of the line, long enough to make Ethan wonder if she thought he was crazy. But then Claire spoke, her tone serious. "Tell me everything." Over the next hour, Ethan recounted every detail, the mysterious object, the men in suits, and his suspicions that something far bigger was going on. To his surprise, Claire didn't laugh or dismiss him. Instead, she listened intently, asking questions that showed she understood far more than she let on. When he finished, she sighed heavily. "Ethan, I'm going to level with you. That thing you saw, it's not human, and neither is your mother, not entirely anyway." His stomach churned at her words. "What do you mean?" "That object is called a soul anchor," she explained. "It's alien technology designed to preserve consciousness, but only temporarily. Your mom became involved in something far beyond our understanding. Whether she knew it or not, she was part of an experiment conducted by beings we don't fully comprehend." Ethan's head spun. Aliens? Experiments? It sounded like something out of a bad sci-fi movie, but the sincerity in Claire's voice made it impossible to dismiss. "Why would they do this?" he asked hoarsely. "I don't know all the details," Claire admitted, "but I can tell you this much. Those anchors are rare, and whoever has access to them isn't playing games. You're dealing with forces that could change everything, for better or worse." Despite the fear gnawing at him, Ethan felt a flicker of determination ignite within his chest. If Claire was right, and he had no reason to doubt her, then his mother's death wasn't the end of the story. There was still a chance to understand what had happened to her, and maybe, just maybe, there was a way to bring her back. "What do I do now?" he asked quietly. Claire hesitated before answering. "First, we find out where that anchor went. Then, we figure out how to stop whoever's using it." For the first time since his mother's passing, Ethan felt a glimmer of hope. It was fragile, uncertain, and fraught with danger, but it was hope nonetheless. Little did he know, the journey ahead would test him in ways he couldn't yet imagine. The next morning, Ethan woke up feeling like he hadn't slept at all. His mind was a whirlwind of questions, doubts, and fears. Aliens? Soul anchors? None of it made sense, but Claire's words lingered in his thoughts, refusing to let him dismiss them as nonsense. She had promised to help him uncover the truth about the mysterious object and what it meant for his mother. But how could they even begin? Claire arrived at Ethan's house just after sunrise, her car pulling into the driveway. With a quiet hum, she stepped out dressed in practical clothes, dark jeans, a leather jacket, and sturdy boots, and carried a backpack slung over one shoulder. Her sharp green eyes scanned the area cautiously before she knocked on the door. When Daniel answered, she introduced herself simply as a friend offering support during a difficult time. Ethan watched from the hallway as his father nodded politely, clearly too exhausted to question her presence. Once inside, Claire wasted no time getting down to business. She led Ethan to his room, closing the door firmly behind them. "We need to move quickly," she said, pulling a laptop and several files from her bag. "If those men in suits are involved, they'll be watching us now." Ethan sat on the edge of his bed, gripping his knees tightly to keep his hands from shaking. "What exactly are we looking for?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "The anchor," Claire replied, opening the laptop. "It's not just a random piece of alien tech, it's part of a network. Whoever took it will try to use it for their own purposes. Our job is to find it first." She pulled up a map on the screen, dotted with red markers scattered across the region. These are locations where similar anchors have been found in the past. Most were recovered by government agencies or private organizations, but some disappeared completely. Your mom's anchor might have been taken to one of these sites. Ethan stared at the map, his chest tightening. "How do we know which one?" "We don't," Claire admitted. "But I've narrowed it down to 3 possibilities based on recent activity patterns." She pointed to 3 specific markers. "One of these facilities has been showing unusual energy spikes lately. That's our best bet." "What about the people who took it?" Ethan asked. "Who are they?" Claire hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "Let's just say they're not human, and they're not exactly friendly. They've been observing Earth for centuries, experimenting with ways to bridge the gap between species. Your mom got caught up in that somehow." Ethan felt sick. "So, she volunteered for this?" "Maybe," Claire said softly. "Or maybe she didn't know what she was agreeing to. Either way, we need to focus on finding her anchor before they activate it." With that, they set off toward the closest facility on Claire's list. It was located deep in the woods outside Maplewood, hidden behind layers of dense forest and guarded by steep hillsides. The drive there was tense, both of them silent as they navigated winding dirt roads. When they finally reached the entrance, a rusted chain-link fence topped with barbed wire, Claire parked the car out of sight and handed Ethan a small flashlight. "Stay close," she instructed, "and don't touch anything unless I tell you to." Inside, the facility was eerily quiet. Rows of abandoned equipment lined the walls covered in dust and cobwebs. The air smelled stale, tinged with the faint metallic tang of machinery long since powered down. As they ventured deeper, however, the atmosphere changed. Lights flickered intermittently, casting strange shadows across the floor. The hum of electricity grew louder, vibrating through the soles of their shoes. They soon found themselves in a large chamber filled with rows of identical metallic devices, each glowing faintly with shifting symbols. Wires snaked across the floor, connecting the devices to massive servers that pulsed with energy. Monitors displayed streams of data written in languages neither Ethan nor Claire could understand. "This is it," Claire whispered, her voice tinged with awe. "This is where they've been storing the anchors." Ethan moved closer to examine one of the devices, his heart pounding. It looked just like the object he'd seen in his mother's coffin. The same shimmering surface, the same intricate patterns. Reaching out instinctively, he stopped himself just short of touching it. Is this my mom's?" "I don't think so," Claire said, studying the monitors. "These anchors are still active. They haven't been used yet. Whoever took your mom's anchor must have brought it somewhere else." Ethan's shoulders sagged in disappointment, but Claire placed a reassuring hand on his arm. "Don't give up, we're close. If we can figure out where they're sending the signals, we might be able to track them." As she worked, typing furiously on her laptop while cross-referencing the data from the monitors, Ethan wandered to the far end of the chamber. There, tucked away in a corner, he discovered something that made his blood run cold. A video recording labeled with his mother's name, Claire, he called out, his voice trembling. "You need to see this." She joined him quickly, her expression darkening as she realized what he'd found. Together they played the recording. On the screen appeared Laura, sitting calmly in what looked like a sterile white room. Her face was pale but composed, her eyes steady as she spoke directly into the camera. "If you're watching this, Ethan," she began, her voice soft but firm, "I need you to understand why I did this. I believed we could learn from them. From beings far more advanced than us, I thought I could help bridge the gap between our worlds, but now—" She paused, her composure faltering for just a moment. "Now I fear I've made a terrible mistake." The video cut off abruptly, replaced by static. Ethan stared at the screen, his mind reeling. His mother had known. She had willingly participated in whatever experiment had led to her death, or apparent death. But what had she unleashed? And why had she sounded so afraid? Before they could process the implications, alarms blared throughout the facility. Red lights flashed overhead, bathing the room in an ominous glow. Automated defenses activated, metal shutters slamming down over the exits and trapping them inside. "We need to go." "Now!" Claire shouted, grabbing Ethan's arm and pulling him toward a service corridor she'd noticed earlier. They ran as fast as they could, dodging falling debris and narrowly avoiding laser beams that shot out from hidden panels in the walls. When they finally burst through a side door and emerged into the cool night air, Ethan collapsed onto the ground, gasping for breath. Claire stood beside him, clutching her laptop tightly. "That was too close," she muttered. "They knew we were coming." Ethan looked up at her, his face pale but resolute. "What happens now?" Claire met his gaze, her expression grim. "Now we follow the signal, wherever it leads." For the first time, Ethan felt a spark of determination ignite within him. Whatever it took, wherever it led, he would find answers, not just for himself, but for his mother. Ethan sat in the passenger seat of Claire's car, his hands gripping the edge of his seat so tightly that his knuckles turned white. They had been driving for hours, following the signal Claire had traced from the abandoned facility. It led them to a remote valley deep in the woods, far from any signs of civilization. The road, if it could even be called that, was little more than a dirt path winding through thick forests and rocky hills. Every bump and turn made Ethan's stomach churn, not just from the rough ride but from the weight of what they might find at the end of it. Claire drove with focused determination, her eyes fixed on the narrow trail ahead. Occasionally she glanced down at the tablet resting on her lap, checking the strength of the signal. "We're close," she said finally, breaking the silence that had settled between them. Her voice was calm, but there was an underlying tension that Ethan couldn't miss. He nodded, though he wasn't sure if he felt relieved or terrified. After everything they'd seen, The glowing devices, the cryptic messages, the strange men in suits. He knew this moment would change everything. Whatever waited for them in the valley, it wasn't going to be ordinary. The car came to a stop at the edge of a clearing. Beyond the trees, the valley opened up before them, bathed in pale moonlight. At its center loomed something that took Ethan's breath away. A massive spacecraft hovered silently above the ground, its sleek design defying logic. Its surface shimmered faintly, reflecting the stars above while glowing blue lines pulsed rhythmically along its sides like veins carrying lifeblood. It was beautiful and utterly alien. "This is it," Claire murmured, stepping out of the car. She pulled her jacket tighter around herself as a cold breeze swept through the clearing. Ethan followed hesitantly, his legs feeling like lead. As they approached the ship, the air grew heavier, charged with an energy that made his skin prickle. He could hear a low hum emanating from the craft, resonating deep within his chest. "Do you think my mom is inside?" Ethan asked quietly, his voice barely audible over the hum. "I don't know," Claire admitted. "But we'll find out." The closer they got, the more details of the ship became visible. Its curves were fluid, almost organic, as though it had grown rather than been built. There were no visible doors or windows, yet somehow Ethan knew it was watching them, waiting. Suddenly, a beam of light descended from the underside of the ship, illuminating the ground in front of them. Ethan instinctively stepped back, shielding, his eyes with one hand. When the brightness faded, a figure stood where the light had touched the earth. It was tall, much taller than a human, with a translucent body that seemed to shimmer and shift as it moved. Its form was humanoid, but its features were indistinct, blending together like smoke trapped in glass. Eyes, or what Ethan assumed were eyes, glowed softly, fixing on him with an intensity that made his heart race. "You have come seeking answers," the being said, its voice resonating not just in Ethan's ears but in his mind. It was neither male nor female, neither kind nor cruel, simply present. Ethan swallowed hard, forcing himself to speak. "My mom, Laura Carter. She's part of your experiment, isn't she?" The being tilted its head slightly as though considering his words. "Laura volunteered to assist us in our work. She believed in the potential for unity between our species. However, unforeseen complications arose during the process." "What kind of complications?" Ethan demanded, his voice rising despite his attempt to stay calm. "The soul anchor designed to preserve her consciousness has destabilized," the being replied. "Her essence exists in a state between dimensions, a limbo of sorts. To restore her fully would require intervention, but such actions carry risks, not only for her but for all of humanity." Ethan felt his knees weaken. This was it. The truth he'd been chasing. His mother wasn't dead, not entirely, but she wasn't alive either. She was trapped somewhere beyond his understanding, caught in the middle of an experiment gone wrong. "What happens if you don't intervene?" Claire asked, stepping forward. Her tone was steady, though Ethan noticed her hands trembling slightly. "The anchor will collapse," the being said simply. "Her consciousness will dissolve, merging with the void. There will be no return." Ethan's chest tightened. He couldn't let that happen, not after coming this far. "What do I need to do to bring her back?" The being regarded him silently for a moment before responding. "You must choose. Restore her soul to your world, or allow her essence to merge fully with ours. Each option carries consequences." "What kind of consequences?" Ethan pressed, desperation creeping into his voice. "To restore her soul requires reintegration, a process that may disrupt the balance of your dimension. To merge her essence with ours ensures her survival but severs her connection to humanity forever." Ethan's mind raced. How could he possibly make such a decision? Bring her back and risk unleashing something dangerous? Or let her go, knowing she'd never truly be part of his life again? Either way, he would lose her in some capacity. Claire placed a hand on his shoulder, grounding him. "Take your time," she whispered. Think carefully. But Ethan didn't have time. The hum of the ship grew louder, vibrating through the ground beneath his feet. The being extended one shimmering arm toward him, palm facing upward, floating. Above it was the soul anchor, the same metallic device Ethan had seen in his mother's coffin. It glowed brighter now, pulsing in sync with the ship's energy. "I need to see her," Ethan said suddenly. "Before I decide, I need to see her." The being hesitated, then nodded. With a wave of its hand, an image appeared in the air, a live feed showing Laura. She looked exactly as she had before, her face calm but strained. Her eyes darted around wildly, as though searching for something or someone. Then, without warning, her expression contorted in pain and she began thrashing violently, her movements jerky and unnatural. "No," Ethan shouted, reaching out instinctively. "Stop it, please." The being lowered its hand and the image vanished. "Her condition worsens," it said. "You must decide soon." Tears streamed down Ethan's face as he stared at the anchor. He thought of all the moments he'd shared with his mother, the laughter, the arguments, the quiet evenings spent side by side. She had always been his anchor, the one constant in his life. Now faced with losing her completely, he realized he couldn't let her go. "Bring her back," he said firmly, his voice cracking under the weight of his decision. "Please, bring her back." The being inclined its head, accepting his choice. The anchor flared brilliantly, bathing the clearing in blinding light. Ethan shielded his eyes, bracing himself for what came next. When the light faded, the ship was gone. In its place stood Laura, alive and whole, smiling at him as if nothing had happened. For a moment, Ethan allowed himself to believe it was over, that everything would be okay. But as he embraced her, he couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone was still watching. Somewhere out there, the experiment continued. The days that followed Laura's return were strange, not in obvious ways, but in small details that gnawed at Ethan's mind. On the surface, everything seemed perfect. His mother was back, alive and healthy, just as he'd hoped. She cooked meals, cleaned the house, and even laughed at Daniel's jokes like she used to. But there was something off about her, something Ethan couldn't quite put into words. It started with little things, like how she never seemed tired, no matter how late she stayed up or how early she woke, or how her movements were eerily precise, almost mechanical, as if every action had been carefully rehearsed. Sometimes, when she thought no one was looking, her gaze would drift toward the window, lingering on the night sky for minutes at a time. And then there were her eyes, still the same warm brown color Ethan remembered, but now they occasionally flickered with a faint, unnatural glow. At first, Ethan tried to convince himself it was all in his head. After everything he'd been through, the alien ship, the soul anchor, the being's cryptic warnings, he figured his mind was playing tricks on him. But the more he watched her, the harder it became to ignore the truth. Something about his mother wasn't entirely human anymore. One evening after dinner, Ethan sat alone in the living room while Laura washed dishes in the kitchen. He stared at the blank TV screen, lost in thought, when he noticed her reflection in the glass. For a split second, her form wavered, shimmering like heat rising off pavement. Then, just as quickly, it stabilized, leaving behind the familiar image of his mother. Ethan's heart raced. He wanted to call out to her to ask what was happening, but fear held him back. What if she didn't know? Or worse, what if she did? Instead, he turned his attention to the window. Outside, the stars twinkled brightly against the dark sky. But as he looked closer, he realized one of them wasn't moving. It hung low, hovering near the horizon like a silent sentinel. It wasn't a star at all. It was the spaceship. They were still watching. The next morning, Ethan decided to confront Claire. He needed answers, and she was the only person who might understand what was going on. He texted her early, asking to meet at the library, a neutral location where they could talk without drawing suspicion. When he arrived, Claire was already there, seated at a corner table surrounded by books and papers. Her sharp green eyes scanned the room before landing on him. "You look like you haven't slept," she said bluntly as he sat down. "I haven't," Ethan admitted, running a hand through his messy hair. Something's wrong with my mom. Claire leaned forward, her expression serious. Wrong how? She's different, Ethan struggled to explain. She acts normal, but there are moments when she doesn't seem real. And last night I saw the ship again. It's still out there watching us. Claire sighed heavily, rubbing her temples. I was afraid of this. Bringing her back must have destabilized the anchor further. Her consciousness might be anchored here, but parts of her essence could still be connected to their dimension. What does that mean? Ethan asked, his voice trembling. Is she going to change? I don't know, Claire admitted. But we can't let our guard down. If the experiment destabilizes completely, it could have catastrophic consequences, for her and for everyone else. Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. What do we do? For now, keep an eye on her, Claire instructed, and document anything unusual. We need to figure out exactly how much of her is still human. Back at home, Ethan tried to act normal, but his anxiety made it difficult. Every movement Laura made, every word she spoke, felt like a test he was failing to decode. That night, unable to sleep, he crept downstairs and found her sitting alone in the living room, staring out the window. Mom? He whispered, hesitating in the doorway. She turned to face him, her smile soft and reassuring. Couldn't sleep either? Ethan shook his head, stepping closer. What are you doing up? Just thinking, she replied, her voice calm. About everything that's happened. He hesitated, unsure whether to press further. Finally, he blurted out, Do you remember anything? From before? Her smile faltered for just a moment, but it was enough to make his stomach drop. Bits and pieces, she said carefully. Enough to know I made a choice, and so did you. Ethereal tension filled the air between them. Ethan wanted to ask more, to demand answers, but something stopped him. Instead, he sat beside her, gazing out the window at the shadowy outline of the ship hovering in the distance. Are they still watching us? He asked quietly. Laura nodded. They're always watching. But don't worry, Ethan, they won't hurt us. How can you be sure? He pressed, his voice rising despite his attempt to stay calm. Because they need us, she said simply. Just like we need them. Her words sent a shiver down his spine. Need us for what? He wanted to ask, but before he could, she stood up and kissed the top of his head. Try to get some rest, she murmured. Everything will make sense soon. As she walked away, Ethan felt a sinking dread settle over him. Nothing about this situation made sense. And yet somehow, it felt inevitable. Over the next few days, Ethan began documenting every strange occurrence. He kept a notebook hidden under his mattress, jotting down notes whenever Laura exhibited behavior that seemed off. The way she avoided direct questions about her time away. The faint hum that sometimes emanated from her when she thought no one was listening. The occasional flashes of light in her eyes, like distant stars trapped within her gaze. Meanwhile, Claire worked tirelessly to uncover more information about the soul anchors and the beings behind them. She discovered reports of similar experiments, conducted across the globe, each ending in disaster. Entire towns had vanished overnight, leaving behind nothing but empty streets and whispers of lights in the sky. It seemed humanity's attempts to bridge the gap between dimensions came at a cost, one that neither side fully understood. One afternoon, Claire called Ethan with urgent news. I found something, she said breathlessly. A signal, a message, from your mom's anchor. It's transmitting coordinates. To where? Ethan asked, gripping the phone tightly. To another facility, one deeper underground than the last. I think they're planning something big, something final. Ethan's chest tightened. What? Do you mean final? I'm not sure, Claire admitted. But whatever it is, it involves your mom and the anchor. If we don't stop it, we might lose her for good. That night, Ethan confronted Laura again. This time, he didn't hold back. You knew what you were getting into, didn't you? He demanded, his voice shaking with anger and fear. You knew the risks. She met his gaze steadily, her expression unreadable. Yes, she admitted, but I also knew the potential rewards. Imagine a world where humans and aliens work together, sharing knowledge, technology, understanding. A world without borders or limitations. And what happens if it fails? Ethan shot back. What happens if the anchor collapses? Then sacrifices will be made, she said softly, but progress always comes at a price. Her words left Ethan reeling. Sacrifices. Was she willing to sacrifice herself, her family, humanity itself? You can't just decide that for everyone, he shouted, tears streaming down his face. We're not ready for this. Laura reached out to touch his cheek, but he pulled away. Maybe not, she said gently. But maybe we never will be unless we take the first step. Before Ethan could respond, the sound of breaking glass shattered the moment. They both turned toward the window, where shards of glass lay scattered across the floor. Hovering outside was the ship, its glowing blue lines pulsing brighter than ever. They're here, Laura whispered, her voice filled with both awe and sorrow. Ethan grabbed her hand instinctively. We have to go. Now. But as they ran toward the door, the house trembled violently, throwing them to the ground. The walls began to crack and the air grew thick with static electricity. Outside, the ship descended lower, casting the entire neighborhood in an eerie blue light. We're too late, Laura murmured, clutching Ethan's arm. The process has begun. Ethan looked at her, panic rising in his chest. What process? The merging, she said simply. Humanity and theirs becoming one. No, Ethan screamed, pulling her toward the car parked in the driveway. We can still stop this. But as they reached the vehicle, a beam of light shot down from the ship, enveloping Laura. She turned to him one last time, her eyes glowing brighter than ever. Goodbye, Ethan, she said, her voice echoing strangely. Remember me. And then she was gone, lifted into the sky and absorbed into the ship. Ethan collapsed to his knees, sobbing uncontrollably. Around him, the world began to change. The stars dimmed, the air grew heavier, and an overwhelming sense of wrongness settled over everything. Whatever had happened, one thing was certain. Life as he knew it would never be the same again. Ethan knelt on the cold pavement, his hands trembling as they pressed against the rough asphalt. His breath came in ragged gasps, each exhale visible in the frosty night air. Above him, the alien ship loomed like a second moon, its pulsating, blue light washing over the neighborhood, turning everything surreal and dreamlike. The world felt wrong, unnaturally still, as though time itself had frozen. His mother was gone, taken, absorbed into the very experiment she'd believed in so deeply. Her final words echoed in his mind. Goodbye, Ethan. Remember me. But how could he remember her when she'd become something beyond comprehension? Something neither fully human nor entirely alien? The sound of crumbling concrete snapped him out of his thoughts. Turning, he saw the house, the home where he'd grown up, where every memory of his childhood lived, slowly disintegrating. Cracks spiderwebbed across the walls, glowing faintly with the same blue light emanating from the ship. Windows shattered one by one, their shards falling to the ground like rain. It wasn't just the house, it was everything. Trees swayed unnaturally, bending toward the ship as if drawn by some invisible force. Cars parked along the curb were lifted off the ground, suspended briefly in midair before dissolving into streams of shimmering particles. Ethan wanted to scream, to run, to do something, but his body refused to move, rooted to the spot by shock and grief. He watched helplessly as the familiar landscape of Maplewood unraveled before his eyes. This wasn't just happening to him, it was happening everywhere. Claire's warnings about the merging made sense now. Humanity and the aliens weren't coexisting. They were being rewritten, fused together into something new, something that didn't belong to either side. As the transformation spread, Ethan noticed figures emerging from the chaos, people who had been outside when the event began. Their faces glowed faintly, their movements slow and deliberate, as if controlled by an unseen hand. Some wandered aimlessly, while others stood perfectly still, staring blankly at the sky. Among them, Ethan spotted neighbors he'd known his whole life. Mrs. Thompson from down the street, Mr. Patel who owned the corner store, even kids he went to school with. None of them seemed aware of him, or anything else for that matter. They were shells of themselves, hollowed out and refilled with whatever this was. Ethan! A voice cut through the haze, sharp and urgent. He turned to see Claire running toward him, her green eyes wide with panic. She grabbed his arm, pulling him to his feet. "We have to leave now." "Leave?" Ethan choked out, his voice hoarse. "Where can we go? Look around you. There's nowhere left." Claire shook, her head fiercely. "There's always somewhere, always a chance. We can't give up, not yet." She dragged him toward her car, which miraculously remained untouched amidst the destruction. As they climbed inside, the vehicle shuddered violently, buffeted by waves of energy radiating from the ship. Claire started the engine, slamming her foot on the accelerator. Tires screeched against the pavement as they sped away, leaving the collapsing neighborhood behind. They drove in silence, the only sounds the hum of the engine and the occasional crackle of static from the radio. Outside, the sky grew darker, the stars dimming as though snuffed out one by one. The further they got from Maplewood, the more pronounced the changes became. Roads buckled and split open, revealing glowing fissures beneath the surface. Buildings twisted and warped, their shapes distorted until they resembled nothing human-made. People continued to wander aimlessly, their glowing forms merging together in clusters that pulsed with unnatural light. Finally, Claire pulled over, near what used to be a highway rest stop. The structure was barely recognizable, its once familiar sign reduced to jagged metal hanging precariously above the entrance. She turned off the engine and faced Ethan, her expression grim but determined. "This isn't just about your mom anymore," she said softly. "This is bigger than us, bigger than humanity. If we don't find a way to stop the merging, there won't be anything left to save." "But how?" Ethan asked, his voice breaking. "How can two people stop something like this?" "We're not alone," Claire replied. "There are others, scientists, researchers, survivors, who've been studying these beings for years. We need to reach them. Together, maybe we can figure out a way to reverse the process." Ethan nodded numbly, clinging to the hope she offered. Hope was all he had left. Hours later, they arrived at a remote compound hidden deep within the mountains. It looked abandoned at first glance, but Claire assured Ethan it was safe. Inside, they found a group of people gathered around a large table covered in maps, blueprints, and alien artifacts similar to the Soul Anchor. At the center of the group stood a man with graying hair and a weary expression. He introduced himself as Dr. Lewis, a physicist specializing in interdimensional phenomena. "You're lucky to have made it this far," he told Ethan and Claire after hearing their story. "Most people don't survive the initial phase of the merging." "What happens next?" Ethan asked, dreading the answer. "The anchors will stabilize," Dr. Lewis explained. "Once that happens, the boundary between dimensions will collapse. Completely. Humans and aliens will cease to exist as separate entities. Instead, we'll become something else." "Can we undo it?" Claire pressed. "Is there any way to stop the anchors?" Dr. Lewis hesitated, exchanging glances with the others. "There might be one option," he admitted reluctantly. "But it's risky, extremely risky." "Tell me," Ethan demanded, leaning forward. "Whatever it is, I'll do it." "Doctor," Lewis sighed heavily. "If we destroy the primary anchor, the one tied to your mother, we might be able to sever the connection. But doing so would destabilize the entire network. Everyone currently linked to the anchors, including your mother, would be lost forever." Ethan felt the blood drain from his face. Destroying the anchor meant losing Laura again, but letting the merging continue meant losing everyone and everything. The weight of the decision crushed him. "I'll do it," he whispered finally, his voice barely audible. The next morning, Ethan stood at the edge of a crater filled with glowing energy. Deep within the swirling vortex floated the primary anchor, its surface etched with symbols that pulsed erratically. Around him, the group worked frantically to set up equipment designed to amplify the anchor's power, long enough to overload it. Once activated, the resulting explosion would obliterate the anchor and everything connected to it. Claire approached him, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. "Are you sure about this?" she asked gently. Ethan nodded, tears streaming down his face. It's what she would have wanted. She gave herself to protect us. Now it's my turn to protect everyone else. As the countdown began, Ethan closed his eyes, replaying memories of his mother in his mind. Her laughter, her smile, her unwavering belief in a better future. When the timer hit 0, a blinding flash engulfed the area, followed by a deafening roar. The ground shook violently, throwing Ethan to his knees. When the light faded, the world was silent. The alien presence was gone. The anchors were destroyed. And though the cost had been devastating, humanity endured. Ethan stared at the empty crater, his heart heavy but resolute. Somewhere out there, Laura was watching over him. And as long as he remembered her, she would never truly be lost.